maybe Rob, if you could think back to early days of Outway at that time, Endure, and sort of maybe if that came up for you and how you might have dealt with it.
Yeah, so we were bootstrapped as well for 5 years. We raised money in the fall of last year, but bootstrapped to, multi 8 figures in sales before raising money. So had to kind of go through the same, dark times of like, how do we fund this thing and where's the money going to come from? And when I started the business, I was in school and in student debt and had no money. So to initially fund it, I put in $1,000 from school loans, which basically meant that I wouldn't be able to eat as much that week or like go out on the weekend or whatever. And then as I needed more money for living, because of course you're not paying yourself, I basically tried to start selling things I owned. And I've talked about another podcast, but previous to like starting a business, I was a competitive elite cyclist. So I had a bunch of bikes that I really loved to ride. But I sold them all. So I sold them all to like basically live, right? And so that's maybe one of the dark sides is that basically for almost like 3 or 4 years until I could afford to buy bikes again. And luckily that the business did well that I could buy bikes again, but I basically couldn't even do what I love to do. I couldn't go ride my bike anywhere. People always ask me, do you still ride bikes? Like, no, I sold them, I had like 3 or 4 at that time, but they were expensive bikes. That's how I could basically, fund myself and basically live while I'm putting everything I have into the business. And I was also working on top of going to school and starting the business. I was working like a few different jobs, like part-time stuff, just to generate more income because I live in Victoria, BC, and it's not cheap to live here. And my student loans that I got just covered the actual school. It didn't cover like living. I didn't have like the qualifications, I guess, to get more than that. So anyways, yeah, like luckily though, early on, kind of like stumbled into a way to use our business model to actually generate additional income by creating white label products for other brands. So like we sell socks, and then one of my old sponsors from cycling said, "Oh, I see you're making socks now. Could you make them for our brand?" And it was kind of like a light bulb moment of like, I guess I could, and the benefit of that model was it was cash up front, and then we would produce and ship. So it generated a lot of free cash flow and there wasn't an inventory risk. So that's really how we funded the company in the early days. And so what I tell like early founders earlier in their journey is I always say like, is there other ways you can use the business you've created and then generate additional income streams? If there's ways of like just doing different iterations of that business model. And for us, it was, well, we became experts at making a product and other people needed the product. And can you find a way to do, like a white label version or something else that doesn't devalue the core brand, which is obviously super important. But that was how we generated cash flow in the early days. Otherwise, there was no way we would have been able to bootstrap to like the 10 million mark. Just the inventory demands and marketing demands to front load the growth are just way too high.
How long did you go before you started actually like paying yourself? Because I think that's the other struggle too, is like, especially for my story anyways, is like, I come from the tech space where I was making really good money and like, I believe in this business so much. So I kind of like made that jump, right? And doing consulting to like pay my bills and not have to dip into my savings quite as much. But I think the other just like big question mark to me is like, how long do people actually go before they like start paying themselves? Or like, at what point did you make that decision that you wanted to kind of not siphon all the money back into the business, but start being able to pay yourself as a founder?
Yeah, that's like something I think that's going to vary based on each person. So luckily, so in our first year, we ended up doing like $350,000 in sales. So it started to do pretty well, and we kept the operation super lean, and we were quite profitable. So like luckily, in my case, we were actually I was able to pay myself like $36,000 a year. So like $3,000 a month, basically, before tax. So like really not a lot, after taxes come off. So, and that was basically just to stay alive. I think the push and pull here though is like a lot of founders think that like, and I've come to like evolve to this line of thinking, but a lot of founders think I need to put every dollar into the business, but your like sanity and quality of living, I'm not saying be extravagant, you are the product as well. You're like the most important thing in the business as a founder in the early days. And if you're not optimized, if you're like going to bed hungry, or if you're like really stressed and and not functioning at a decent level, then I would kind of question whether or not you're making the investment in yourself as well. Like, you are a part of the business. So
Yeah.
I don't think people need to look at like paying themselves as an extravagance. Like 36 grand is not a lot of money, but it put food on the table, and like, you need to eat. And my other way of looking at this is entrepreneurship is like a sport, and you have to treat yourself like an athlete. And part of that is like, you need to be able to give yourself time to exercise. You need to give yourself time to rest. You need to make sure you're eating quality food, because these things are all important. And business is so difficult that if you're not doing these things, the path to burnout is much shorter than if you were to be taking care of yourself. And so I think that's probably like, however, you need the money to be able to pay yourself. So like, there's that push and pull. I would just say, like, if there needs to be a point in which that you're making some money, that you want to be taking a little bit out, because you have to recognize that like an investment in yourself as the founder is equally as important as an investment into marketing channels or more product development, because you are literally basically doing everything. Like, and if you're not functioning at the highest level, then I would always kind of push back on a founder and be like, well, then like, is your business really going to make it? Like, because like, I think a lot of startups and founders and businesses, the first few years, it's like really the success is just on the grit and kind of like of the founder. Like, are they willing to keep going and roll with the punches? It's not generally their genius or generally the product or anything like that in the early days. It's really, can you stay alive long enough to make sense what you're doing? And once you do, then you can actually start to grow. And that's usually about 2 years, I find.